The sun hung low over the canyon, casting long, jagged shadows against the rugged rock walls. A breeze swept through the narrow ravine, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. The atmosphere felt like a calm before a storm, but no one who lived in the isolated valley could have predicted the brutal violence that would soon shatter their peaceful world. Lily Thornton, a bright-eyed 8-year-old girl, skipped along the dusty trail behind her father, Noah, as they made their way toward the family's modest campsite. The group had come to the canyon for a weekend of rest, away from the toils of everyday life in the nearby town. It was a rare occasion when they could afford the time off. And Noah had promised his daughter that this trip would be different, more exciting, more adventurous. It would be their time. Lily's mother, Clara, was ahead, unpacking their things, humming softly as she set up the fire pit. She was always the one who made things feel normal, even in the wildness of the canyon. Her nurturing energy had a way of making the harsh landscape feel like home. The family's sense of tranquility seemed unshakable. There was a certain purity in this part of the world that had yet to be tainted by the complications of society. But that evening, as the sun began to dip behind the canyon's steep cliffs, the first hint of unease settled over the campsite. Noah stopped to adjust the straps of his pack, turning to look at Lily with a smile. "You stay close now." "All right, I'm gonna get some firewood." Lily nodded, her ponytail bouncing as she scampered off to join her mother. The crackling sound of the fire was a comforting sound, like a lullaby amidst the silence of the wilderness. The wind had picked up again, swirling dust into the air and causing the flames to flicker. Casting odd shadows on the stone walls, Clara looked up at her daughter, her expression gentle. "Come help me with the stones, sweetheart. We're going to make the fire a little stronger tonight." As Lily crouched beside her mother, a sudden, sharp sound broke the evening's stillness, a distant crack, like the snap of a twig under heavy boots. Clara's hand froze mid-motion, and Lily looked up, sensing the tension in her mother's body. "Stay here," Clara whispered, before rising and moving toward the edge of their camp. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. "Noah," she called out softly. Her voice was a mere breath, but Lily could sense the alarm in it. Her mother had never sounded like that before. Lily's heart began to race. She stood still, watching her mother and then glancing around the darkening canyon. The shadows seemed to grow longer with every passing second. There was another noise, now footsteps, faint but growing louder. The fire crackled louder than ever, its flames reaching higher into the night. A chill ran down Lily's spine. The feeling was wrong, like an impending storm, not just in the weather, but in the air itself. She had barely taken a step toward her mother when a figure appeared from the darkness. A silhouette framed by the fading light. The man was tall, rugged, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that obscured much of his face. His clothing was tattered, the worn fabric hanging loose around his body like an old, weathered flag. The man moved with purpose, and his eyes locked onto Clara with an unsettling intensity. Noah came running toward the camp, a bundle of firewood in his arms. He froze when he saw the man. "Who are you?" Noah's voice was low but sharp. He instinctively placed himself between the stranger and his family, his hand subtly moving to the rifle slung across his back. The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Just passing through," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "Got a little lost in these parts, ain't got much of a choice but to make camp here. Seems like..." Lily could hear her father's breath catch as he studied the stranger. There was something off about him, something in his posture that made Noah's instincts flare. Something predatory. Before Noah could speak again, another figure emerged. From the shadows, this one even taller, broader. Two more followed, all dressed in similar ragged clothing. The group formed a loose circle around the campsite, their eyes cold and calculating. "Best not get too comfortable," the first man said, his grin widening. Lily's stomach twisted into knots as her heart hammered in her chest. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a trap. She turned to look at her mother, who had her hand subtly placed near the knife she kept at her waist. Clara's gaze flickered toward Noah, and in that moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. Things were about to change. The wind howled louder now, and Lily's pulse quickened. The peaceful canyon had turned into a battleground, though none of them knew it yet. The canyon, with all its beauty and secrets, would soon bear witness to horrors no one could have ever imagined. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of dust and something more unsettling, something dangerous. Lily stood frozen beside her mother, her small hand gripping Clara's skirt, the feeling of fear creeping up her spine. like an icy finger? The men had surrounded them now, their shadows growing larger and more menacing in the fading light. Noah remained still, his eyes flicking between the strangers, calculating the odds, his fingers twitching by his rifle. He didn't know how many were in the group, 5 or 6, by the looks of it, but he knew that his family was in immediate danger. The man who had first approached them took a step forward, his grin still stretched too wide, almost mocking. "I'm sorry to disturb you folks," the man drawled, his voice low but menacing. "But you'll have to vacate the premises. This canyon belongs to men who don't take kindly to trespassers." His eyes slid over Clara, then to Noah. "It'd be a real shame if something happened to your little camp here." Noah's jaw clenched. He was trying to hold back the rising tide of panic, keeping his tone level. "We're not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady but full of warning. "You're the ones who need to leave. Now." For a moment, the air hung thick with tension. The strangers didn't move. It was as if they were savoring the power they held in that moment. The first man, still grinning, nodded to one of his companions, a hulking figure with a scar running down his face, who stepped forward. He was clearly the muscle of the group. His rough hand gripped a crude axe, and his eyes were hard, calculating. "You misunderstand," the first man said, a cold edge creeping into his voice. "We don't ask twice." Clara's hand shifted to the hilt of her knife. Lily could feel her mother's body stiffen beside her, and the protective energy Clara had always exuded seemed to heighten. Her mother had always been the calm to her father's fiery protectiveness, but now it was clear she would do whatever it took to defend her family. "Clara," Noah murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Stay close. Don't move until I say." Lily looked up at her father. His face was set in a grim mask, the kind she had only seen when he was preparing for trouble. Noah wasn't a man who liked to fight. He was a farmer, a builder, someone who sought peace. But when it came to his family, that peace had limits. Suddenly, the silence broke with a loud, sharp crack, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Noah's body jerked as a bullet grazed his arm, the impact sending him reeling to the side. He let out a sharp cry, more of surprise than pain, but Clara's reaction was immediate. She pulled Lily down to the ground, shielding her with her body as the wind picked up, swirling dust and debris around them. The man who had fired the shot was standing a few paces away, his rifle raised, his eyes dark and full of malice. The others watched, unmoving, as though they were waiting for the signal to strike. Noah gritted his teeth, clutching his wounded arm, but the anger in his eyes was unmistakable. The attackers were now emboldened. Clara moved to her feet, her voice a fierce whisper. "Get to the horses, Lily, go." Lily hesitated, fear rooting her to the ground. She had never seen her mother like this before, calm, but full of a quiet fury that was terrifying. "Go," Clara repeated, pushing her gently toward the edge of camp. "Now, Lily." Lily's heart was pounding in her chest, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from her parents. She could see the blood on her father's sleeve now, the way his face twisted in pain, the way his gaze never left the group of men. He was trying to buy them time. Lily's legs felt as though they were moving in slow motion. Her mother's order echoed in her head as she made her way to the horses, every part of her body screaming for her to stay, to help, to fight. But Clara knew her mother knew that there was nothing Lily could do to help. The girl was just 8, and these men were far more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. By the time Lily reached the horses, the men had started to move. One of them, a wiry man with a cruel smile, began to circle Noah and Clara. He was enjoying this, playing with them, testing how far they would let him push. Lily's hands fumbled with the reins, her tiny fingers unable to grip the leather tightly. Her heart raced as she tried to calm the horses, but the sound of shouting behind her only made the animals restless. She had to think. She had to do something. She glanced back at the campfire, where the flames now flickered eerily in the growing dark. Her father's voice was muffled, but Lily could hear the defiance in it, even from here. "No one is going anywhere." The shot had hit him, but Noah wasn't going to give in. Lily had never felt more helpless in her life. She didn't understand why these men were doing this. She didn't understand why they were willing to hurt her family. But one thing was clear: if they were going to survive, something had to change. With trembling hands, Lily mounted the horse, not fully knowing what she intended to do next. But there was something in her, a spark of defiance, that refused to let her run away. Not when they needed her. Not when everything she loved was at risk. The cold air felt heavier than ever as Lily urged the horse forward, its hooves striking the rocky ground in rhythmic thuds. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that she needed to get away, to make sure the men didn't harm her family. But as her heart raced with fear, another wave of helplessness surged through her. What could an 8-year-old girl do against 5 grown men with guns and knives? The horse's hooves clattered against the rocks as Lily steered the animal along the narrow trail, her mind spinning. She glanced back at the campsite, her mother and father, who had fought so hard to give her a peaceful life, and saw her father's silhouette standing defiantly between the men and Clara. The scene was chaotic. Now, the men shouted orders, some advancing, while others seemed to hang back, waiting for something. But Noah was still standing his ground, and Clara was beside him, holding her knife with a fierceness that made Lily's heart swell with pride. Lily's breath came in sharp gasps as she pulled the reins harder, urging the horse to move faster, but the animal was as spooked as she was, its nerves stretching taut. She could feel the panic rise, her hands shaking so much that it was hard to hold on to the reins. The canyon walls seemed to close in around her, the narrow trail winding through the jagged rocks like a snake. There was nowhere to go. Nowhere safe. Think, Lily. Think, she whispered to herself, her voice quivering. Suddenly, a thought broke through her panic. The horses, they could be used as a distraction. If she could get back to the camp and set them loose, they might scatter the men long enough for her parents to make a run for it. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Without thinking, Lily turned the horse back around, urging it back toward the camp. Her pulse thundered in her ears as the wind picked up, stirring the dust and rattling the dried brush along the edges of the trail. The campsite was just ahead, the crackling fire barely visible from this distance. She could hear the faint shouts of the men, but there was no sign of the struggle yet. Lily slowed the horse as she neared the edge of the camp. She didn't dare get too close. From her position, she could see her father still standing between the men and Clara. Noah's voice was sharp and commanding, but the desperation in his tone was clear now. Clara was still holding the knife, though her stance was beginning to falter. The odds were not in their favor. Without another moment's hesitation, Lily dismounted. She tied the reins loosely to a nearby tree and crouched low, heart hammering. In her chest, the horses were grazing quietly in the distance, unaware of the impending chaos. She knew this was her only chance. She crept toward the corral where her father kept the other 2 horses, trusty, strong animals that had carried them through many days of hard work. The ground beneath her was soft with dirt, muffling her footsteps. Just as she reached the fence, a sudden noise made her freeze a shout. It came from her father. Clara, get back! Lily's heart skipped a beat, and her head snapped around in the direction of the camp. The man with the rifle had just stepped forward, the barrel raised. Lily's eyes widened in horror. She could see the aim of the rifle lining up with her father's chest. Without thinking, Lily dashed toward the horses. She could hear Clara's voice now, shouting for her father to move, to get out of the way. But Noah didn't budge. He was still standing between the men and his family, as if willing to take whatever was coming. No, no, Lily cried under her breath as she fumbled with the gate to the corral. The horses were spooked now, nervously pacing in their stalls. She needed them to run, to scatter, to give her father and mother a chance. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled with the latch, the sound of the shouting in the background growing louder. Suddenly, the latch clicked open. Go, go, Lily urged, her voice breaking. She swung the gate wide, and the horses bolted into the night, their hooves pounding on the ground as they raced off into the wilderness. It was enough. It had to be enough. Lily turned to run back toward the camp, her heart pounding harder than ever. But as she moved through the underbrush, she heard it. A loud crack, followed by a sickening thud. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the sound of a body hitting the ground. Noah! Clara screamed. Lily's legs felt like they were made of stone, but she pushed forward, running as fast as she could. Her father couldn't be. She wouldn't let that happen. She couldn't lose him. Not like this. When she emerged from the shadows, she saw him. Noah was on the ground, his hand clutching his side, blood soaking through his shirt. The rifle-wielding man was standing over him, his face twisted with satisfaction. Clara had her knife raised, but she was too late. The men were closing in around her, their weapons drawn. The odds were even worse now. Lily didn't think. She acted, with a scream that felt like it came from deep within her bones. She grabbed a large rock from the ground and hurled it as hard as she could. It flew through the air, striking one of the men in the shoulder. The man staggered back, momentarily stunned. It was all the distraction Clara needed. Get up, now! Clara shouted to Noah, her voice raw with fear and fury. Lily's father struggled to his feet, his face pale from pain, but his eyes locked onto his daughter. A brief flicker of understanding passed between them. This wasn't over. Not yet. As the horses galloped into the distance, their hooves echoing in the canyon, the men cursed and regrouped. They were furious and they were desperate. Lily's heart raced, but a strange calm settled over her. There was still a chance. Her family was alive. But they would have to fight their way out. The sound of the horses fading into the night seemed to hang in the air like a distant echo, a reminder that their best chance for survival had just bolted away. The men, momentarily distracted by the horses' flight, now turned their focus back to the Thornton family. Noah gritted his teeth against the pain of his wound, but he didn't falter. He could feel the blood seeping through his shirt, a sickening warmth spreading across his side, but it wasn't enough to make him stop. He wouldn't stop. Not until his family was safe. Clara was by his side, her posture tense, knife gripped tightly in her hand. Her eyes darted between the attackers, calculating their next move. The knife gleamed faintly in the firelight, a small but deadly weapon in the face of men who were armed with rifles and axes. Lily, trembling but determined, stood just behind her parents, her heart pounding in her chest. She had thrown the rock, and though it had given them a momentary advantage, she knew it wasn't enough. The men would regroup, and they'd be back in full force. The reality of the situation settled over her like a weight. They were outnumbered, they were outgunned, but one thing she knew, deep in her bones, was that her family wasn't going down without a fight. The man with the rifle, the one who had shot Noah, stepped forward. His grin was gone now, replaced with a hard, menacing scowl. He didn't speak for a moment, simply watching them with cold eyes, as if savoring the moment before the storm. "You're all gonna regret this," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Noah's voice was steady despite the pain. "We know exactly who you are. And you're not welcome here." The man with the rifle laughed. A short, bitter sound. "You think you can stop us? You really think you can stand against us? There's no one coming for you. No one's gonna find you out here in this canyon." Lily's mind raced. Her father's defiance was a spark of hope, but it was fragile, thin, like a candle in the wind. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand here and wait for things to get worse. She had already seen what these men were capable of, and she had no intention of becoming a victim. The scar-faced man who had been lurking on the outskirts of the group now stepped forward, his gaze cold and calculating. He raised his axe, twirling it in his hands as if it were a toy, enjoying the intimidation it created. "You'll be begging for mercy before long," he sneered, eyeing Clara. "It'll be over quickly for you." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She could see the fear flicker across her mother's face, but Clara's expression never faltered. She stood tall, her body taut with readiness, her grip tightening on the knife. She was afraid, but she wouldn't let it show. Not now. Noah shifted slightly, wincing from the pain in his side, but his eyes remained sharp. "Clara," he said, softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Get ready. We make a break for it on my signal." Clara nodded, her eyes flicking toward the small campfire burning low behind them. It was their only source of light in the growing darkness of the canyon, and as the minutes ticked by, the shadows seemed to grow deeper, more suffocating. Lily's gaze shot back toward the men. The leader, the one with the rifle, was still talking, taunting them, but Lily wasn't listening to him anymore. She was watching their movements, studying their posture, looking for any opening, any weakness. Then, something caught her eye. The man with the scar was distracted, his attention on one of the others. He had lowered his axe for a moment, clearly thinking the fight was already won. Lily's heart surged. This was it. Without thinking, she turned to her mother. "Mom, the fire." Now. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest branch, lit from the edge of the fire, and hurled it toward the edge of the camp. The flames flickered as it landed, scattering sparks across the dry ground. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ignite the dry brush near the camp, setting it ablaze in an instant. The fire spread quickly, roaring to life, as if the very land around them had decided to fight back. The men cursed, stumbling backward, disoriented by the sudden flames. For a moment, confusion reigned. Lily's pulse raced as the ground trembled with the sound of the spreading fire. The smoke quickly billowed into the air, making it harder to see. The heat from the flames intensified, and the men faltered, their attention now divided between the fire and the family they had been threatening. Noah didn't waste a second. He grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her toward the shadows at the edge of the camp. "Move, now," he shouted, his voice hoarse but full of command. Clara was right beside them, her hand on the hilt of the knife, ready for anything. The family darted into the underbrush, moving swiftly, their hearts pounding as they sought the cover of the canyon's rocky outcroppings. The fire had given them a moment, but they knew it wouldn't last. The men would regroup. They would be right behind them. As they ran, Lily risked a glance back at the campsite. The fire was raging now, sending bright, flickering light up into the sky, but the men had recovered quickly. They were already moving toward the source of the blaze, weapons in hand. Noah stumbled, his side still bleeding, but he didn't stop. They couldn't stop. Not until they were safe. The canyon, which had once seemed like a peaceful refuge, had become a battleground. The wind picked up again, howling through the canyon like a living thing, carrying with it the smell of smoke and fear. Lily's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them forever. They had to find a way out. A way to fight back, and deep down, Lily knew that the only way out was through. She had to be strong. They all did. The trio moved as quickly as the terrain would allow, their footsteps muffled by the dry, sandy ground. The canyon's walls rose high on either side, and the shadows seemed to grow longer with every step. The fire they had started was still visible behind them, its crackling roar a reminder of the chaos they had just barely escaped. It was a small victory, but they all knew that it was only temporary. The attackers were relentless, and now, in the thick of the canyon, they were just as dangerous as the men chasing them. Noah was struggling, his face was pale, his steps uneven, and the blood staining his side had soaked through his shirt. His breathing was shallow, and Lily could see the grimace on his face as he tried to hide the pain. But he wasn't going to stop. He couldn't, not with Clara and Lily depending on him. Clara's expression was steely, her eyes darting back and forth, scanning the shadows for any sign of pursuit. Her hand still gripped the knife, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating their next move, evaluating their options. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. Not now. Lily clutched her father's hand tightly, her fingers slick with sweat. Her heart was racing, but she tried to focus on what they needed to do next. They needed to keep moving, to find shelter, or a place to hide. But the canyon was unforgiving, its narrow paths winding like a maze. There were no clear directions, and every turn seemed to lead them deeper into the unknown. "Keep going," Noah murmured, his voice strained. "We need to get to the high ground. We can't let them corner us." Clara nodded without a word, leading the way up a steep path that wound around the rocks. The high ground would give them a vantage point, a chance to defend themselves. But it also meant being exposed. The men would catch up soon. And when they did, the fight would be on. Lily's thoughts raced as they ascended the trail. She could hear the distant sound of the men's voices, muffled by the canyon walls but unmistakable. They were closing in. She didn't know how much time they had left. All she knew was that if they didn't find a way to escape, they would be trapped in the canyon, surrounded by enemies. The path grew steeper, and Lily's legs began to ache from the climb. Her breath was coming in quick, shallow gasps, and her heart was thumping in her chest. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up with her parents, but she forced herself to push forward. There was no choice. She had to stay strong. At last, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a plateau. It wasn't much, a small, flat area surrounded by towering cliffs, but it offered a brief moment of respite. The view was breathtaking, the canyon stretching out below them in every direction, the vast emptiness of the land seeming to swallow them whole. Noah collapsed onto a rock, his side heaving with every breath. Clara knelt beside him, quickly assessing his wound. It was bad, but not fatal, at least. Not yet. Blood had soaked through his shirt, and the wound was still bleeding steadily, but he had stopped sweating. His body was fighting. "We need to patch you up," Clara said, her voice calm but firm. "Lily, get the first aid kit from the pack." Lily's hands shook as she retrieved the kit from the bag. The weight of the situation pressed down on her like a stone. But she focused on the task, knowing that every second mattered. Her father's life depended on it, as she helped her mother tend to Noah's wound. She heard the faint sound of footsteps below them, closer now. The men were coming. They had found their trail. And it wouldn't be long before they reached the plateau. "We don't have much time," Clara said, her voice low but urgent. "We need to keep moving." Lily's heart skipped a beat. They couldn't stay here, not with the men so close. She looked up at the towering cliffs around them. her mind racing for a way out. There had to be anything she could do, and then, as if by fate, something caught her eye. A narrow crack in the canyon wall, hidden in the shadows of the plateau. It wasn't much, just a slit in the rock, but it was enough. If they could make it there, they could hide. It wouldn't be easy, but it was their only shot. "Mom, Dad," Lily whispered urgently, her voice tight with fear. "There's a way out. A crack in the rock. We can hide there." Clara turned her head sharply, her eyes narrowing as she followed Lily's gaze. "You're sure?" Lily nodded, her breath quickening. "I'm sure. It's our only chance." Noah struggled to his feet, his hands still pressed against his side to stem the bleeding. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady. "Then we don't waste any more time." With Clara leading the way, they moved quickly, crossing the plateau toward the crack Lily had spotted. It was tight, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through, but it would do. If they could get inside, they could wait for the men to pass by. They just had to make it in time. As they approached the crack, the sound of the men's voices grew louder. They were getting closer. They had no choice now. They had to move, and they had to move fast. Noah pushed forward first, gritting his teeth against the pain, his eyes darting nervously over his shoulder. Clara followed closely behind, her eyes sharp and vigilant. Lily was last, her small body slipping into the narrow space with ease, though her heart pounded with fear. The crack led deeper into the rock, curving and twisting like a tunnel. It was dark inside, the walls close and claustrophobic, but it was shelter. It was a place to breathe, a place to think. Lily stopped once they were deep enough inside. Turning to look out at the canyon below, she could still hear the men, their voices now muffled by the rock. They were close to close, but they hadn't seen them yet. Clara knelt beside Noah, her eyes scanning his wound once more. "We need to patch you up properly," she said, her voice calm despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't stay here forever." Lily nodded, her stomach twisting. There was no easy way out of this. The men would keep searching, keep hunting them. But for the first time since the attack, Lily allowed herself a breath of relief. They were safe for now, but the canyon held secrets that could either save them or doom them. And Lily was about to uncover one. The crack in the canyon wall was both a blessing and a curse. The family was hidden for now, but it was clear that they couldn't stay in the narrow passage forever. The walls pressed in on them, the air thick with dust and the smell of stone. Lily could hear the distant echo of the men searching below, their voices floating up like faint, distorted murmurs. But in the silence of their hiding place, she felt the weight of time press down on her. Noah leaned against the stone wall, sweat dripping from his forehead. Clara was tending to his wound, her movements efficient but tense. Lily crouched next to her, holding a damp cloth against her father's brow. He was alive, but it was clear that if they didn't get out of the canyon soon, they might not make it. "Mom," Lily whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We can't stay here forever. They'll find us." Clara didn't answer at first. She was too focused on tending to Noah, her hands moving deftly as she worked with the small kit they had. The fire that Lily had started earlier still burned somewhere outside, a distant reminder of the chaos that had ensued. But Clara knew they couldn't rely on the fire to distract the men forever. It had bought them time, but now, with their backs pressed against the stone, they were running out of options. "We need to find a way out of this canyon," Clara said, her voice low and steady. "Somewhere they won't think to look." Noah's head turned toward her, his eyes filled with grim determination. He could barely sit up now, his breath coming in shallow, labored gasps. But even through the pain, he understood what Clara meant. They couldn't stay here. The canyon was a death trap, and their pursuers weren't going to stop until they found them. Lily looked up at the narrow crack in the wall, her mind racing. The passage they had taken was a tight squeeze, but it was only the first of many twists and turns. If they could move deeper into the canyon, maybe they could find a hidden passage. An escape route the men wouldn't know about. She didn't have a plan, but she knew one thing: they had to keep moving. "I'll check ahead," Lily said, her voice more confident than she felt. "I'll go a little farther into the tunnel. Maybe we'll find something." "No, Lily." Noah's voice was sharp, the concern in his eyes matching the seriousness of his tone. "It's too dangerous. We need to stay together." Clara placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Your father's right. We stick together. We don't know what's ahead, and I won't let you go off alone." Lily's heart sank, but she didn't argue. Her parents were scared too. They had every right to be, but there was something inside of hers, something fierce and determined that wouldn't let her back down. The sound of footsteps reached their ears, faint but unmistakable. The men were getting closer. They were searching for them. They would find the crack eventually. Clara looked at Noah, then at Lily, and her eyes narrowed with sudden resolve. I know where we need to go. Noah turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. Where? There's a passage deeper in the canyon, Clara said, her voice quiet but steady. I've heard rumors of it. It's old, forgotten, but it's there. It could lead us out of here. Lily's eyes widened. She had never heard of such a place. How do you know about it? Clara hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting toward the dark passage. She didn't answer immediately. I heard it from some of the old prospectors. It's not a well-known route. The land shifts, the rocks move, and the passage is hidden behind a series of narrow ledges and caves. Lily's pulse quickened. Could it really be true? Could there be a way out, hidden right beneath their feet? Clara's voice was low and determined. We have no other choice. If we don't take it now, we'll be trapped. We'll be caught. Noah pushed himself upright, groaning in pain but refusing to stay down. Then let's go. We don't have much time. Lily helped him to his feet, her mind racing. If there really was a way out of the canyon, it would be their only chance, but it was a long shot. Who knew how far this passage could take them, or what dangers lay ahead? Lead the way, Noah said, looking at Clara, trusting her completely. Clara nodded, then took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the narrow passage. Ahead of them, stay close. It won't be easy, but if we're lucky, it'll get us to the other side. They began moving again, slowly and cautiously, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the jagged canyon walls. The further they moved, the darker and narrower the tunnel became. It twisted and turned, winding through the rock like some ancient, forgotten labyrinth. It was harder to see now, the air thick with dust, but Lily kept her eyes fixed on the back of her mother's head, trying not to let her fear get the best of her. As they walked, Lily's mind kept racing. She didn't know how much farther they had to go, or how long it would take to find the hidden passage Clara had mentioned. All she knew was that the men were getting closer, and if they couldn't find a way out, they wouldn't make it through the night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to widen, the walls giving way to a small, open cavern. It was quieter here, the air cooler, but something about the place felt ancient, like it had been untouched for centuries. There was a strange, still energy in the air, a sense of something forgotten. This is it, Clara said, her voice hushed. With reverence, the passage should be just ahead. Lily's eyes scanned the cavern, her breath catching in her throat. The rocks were covered in strange, ancient markings, worn smooth by time. There were narrow ledges leading up to a higher platform, and, at the far end, she could just make out a dark opening and exit of some sort. We have to hurry, Noah said, his voice strained. They're coming. Clara nodded. We move now. We stay quiet, and we keep going until we're through. Lily followed close behind her parents, her mind racing with the possibility that this might really be their way out. But there was no time to think about it now. They had to move, and they had to move fast. The men wouldn't stop until they were caught, and if this passage truly led to safety, they had to find it before they were found. The cavern was a breath of fresh air compared to the tight, suffocating tunnel they'd just crawled through. But the moment they stepped into the open space, something shifted in the atmosphere. The weight of the canyon was still there, pressing down on them, but now there was a flicker of hope if they could just make it out. If they could find the exit. The faint sound of approaching footsteps echoed off the stone walls, bouncing and distorting in the narrow passageways. The men were closer now. The fire had been their distraction, but it wouldn't last much longer. They had no time to waste. Lily clutched her father's hand, her small fingers tightening around his. He was still bleeding, his steps staggered, but his resolve was ironclad. No matter what, he wasn't giving up. Not for Clara, and certainly not for her. Clara's face was hard with determination. Her hand on the hilt of the knife, eyes scanning the dark corners of the cavern. She had led them this far, and now the only thing standing between them and the men hunting them was a sliver of rock. An ancient passageway that seemed to hold a century of secrets. Noah stopped suddenly, holding up a hand to signal for them to be still. His eyes narrowed as he listened to the distant shuffling below. They're getting close, he murmured, grimacing as pain shot through his side. We can't wait here. Clara whispered back, we have to keep moving. But even as she spoke, they heard it, another set of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, unmistakable. They weren't alone in the cavern anymore. Lily's stomach clenched. Her eyes darted toward the far end of the cavern, where the dark tunnel mouth loomed like the mouth of some ancient beast. Was it the exit? Or another trap? Another dead end? "We need to find the passage," Noah rasped, his voice low but urgent. "If we don't move now, we're dead." Clara nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "This way." They moved in silence, quickly but quietly, their feet light against the stone. The cavern seemed to stretch on endlessly, the shadows deeper than they had expected. The higher ledges were a challenge to navigate, but they had no choice now but to risk it. Lily kept her eyes fixed on her parents, her heart racing as they neared the edge of the ledge. The narrow path that led up was steep and treacherous. One wrong move, and they could be sent tumbling into the jagged rocks below. And then, a voice low and Katinkin from behind them. "You think you can escape?" It was the voice of the man with the rifle, the leader. He was closer than Lily had thought. They froze. Lily's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her ears as the footsteps drew closer, heavy and purposeful. There was no time to think, no time to run. "They're blocking the way," Clara said softly, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to hold them off long enough to get through." Hold them off. Noah's voice was incredulous. His face was pale, his body swaying with exhaustion, but his eyes never wavered. "Clara, there's no time for that. We need to move now." Lily's gaze flickered between her parents. They both knew the reality. There was no way out without a fight. The men wouldn't just let them walk away. They would die for this. They had already proven that, but Lily wasn't ready to die. Not like this. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as the men moved closer. Lily looked to her left, her eyes scanning the rocks. And then, as if by instinct, she spotted a small, sharp rock jutting out from the cliff face. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Her heart leaped. If she could get to it, she could. "Lily," Clara hissed, grabbing her arm, pulling her back into the shadows. "Stay close." Lily resisted, her voice tight with desperation. "I have an idea." Before Clara could stop her, Lily slipped from her grip, racing toward the ledge. The world seemed to slow as she sprinted across the uneven terrain, her pulse echoing in her ears. She didn't look back. The men were coming. The sharp rock was within reach now. Lily didn't hesitate. She grabbed it, her fingers scraping against the rough stone. It was jagged, heavy enough to cause serious damage. She turned and held it, high, ready to defend her family. And that's when she saw him, the man with the rifle, standing just on the other side of the cavern, a smirk on his face. The same smirk he had worn when they first encountered him, so certain of his victory. "You really think that'll stop me, little girl?" the man sneered, raising his rifle. Lily's heart slammed in her chest, but her hands didn't tremble. She knew what she had to do. She hurled the rock at him with all her might, aiming for his head. The man let out a startled shout as it collided with his skull, the impact sending him stumbling backward, momentarily disoriented. The rifle clattered to the ground. Clara didn't waste a second. She lunged, grabbing the rifle and using it to knock the man off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. Lily's breath caught as Clara and Noah rushed past her, heading toward the narrow passageway at the far end of the cavern. They were almost there. The man with the rifle was scrambling to get up, but Clara wasn't about to let him. "Noah, go," she shouted, her voice sharp as steel. "Lily, now." Lily was already moving. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through, but it was their only way out. She could hear the men scrambling behind them, cursing and shouting, as they regained their footing, but there was no turning back now. They squeezed through the narrow opening, the rocks scraping their sides, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Every step felt like a victory, but it wasn't over. The men were right behind them. They could hear the clatter of boots, the curses echoing through the rock. They were running out of time. Noah's hand reached out for Lily, pulling her forward. As they navigated the final stretch of the tunnel, they could see the dim light of the canyon ahead. The end was near, and then, just as they were about to emerge into the open, Lily heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and quick, coming toward them. The men were right there. Clara and Noah exchanged a brief knowing glance. There was no way around it. The passage had led them here, but there was no more hiding. They had to make their stand.